All right. Hello, everyone. It's Kali Arevalo, editor of Institutional Investing and Infrastructure. Today, I have Xavier Martin, a partner at Cube Infrastructure Managers, with me. We're going to talk a little bit about the mid-market digital infrastructure landscape in Europe. But before we start, Xavier, let me just have you add some additional color to your role at Cube and your background, if you don't mind.
Thank you, Kali, for having me here today. I'm the head of telecoms and digital at Cube Infrastructure Manager in Luxembourg. I joined Cube recently, but my relationship with Cube dates back to 2018 when I was the president of a fiber company that Cube acquired. So I'm here, given my operational experience as the CEO of three telecom companies. And it's all about transforming the assets that we have in the portfolio. And yeah, very happy to be here.
No, it's great to have you on the program, and I'm excited to kind of jump into this topic. We actually talked a little bit about just how the markets are different when it comes to the digital infrastructure landscape. What opportunities are you finding in the data center space in Europe in particular, in the middle market as well?
Different to what we see, for instance, in connectivity with fiber networks. In the computer world, we are in the beginning of the S curve, the development of the whole industry. In fiber in Europe, we have been 30 years developing these networks. In the computing world, in data centers, I would say it's a business that has started materializing in concrete terms in the last 5, 10 years. So we have a lot of opportunities ahead in different perspectives. First of all, it's about development. It's about growth. It's about expanding the geography of computing in Europe. We have started, in the five main markets, which are called the FLAP market, is the acronym of Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. And today, it represents three-quarters of the computing market in Europe. Now we are moving to tier two and tier three cities because proximity is an asset. Latency, which is the time at which the workloads travel, starts to be relevant for certain applications. The market in Europe is growing at around 20% per year, but it's growing in a very different way than the United States. In the United States, it's all about scale and size. Training LLM models is one of the main drivers of the growth. Whereas in Europe, we don't have so many large language models to train. It's much more about having access to those models. It's much more about corporate adoption of those capabilities. It's about transformation of the companies. It's about augmentation of the capabilities, meaning that the capillarity, the size of these data centers is typically much smaller, and meaning that, the number of small data center is very high. We also start seeing that some markets are starting to get more mature, meaning that there are consolidation opportunities. Some of the data centers, small size, are family owned, are small carve-outs of on-prem data centers of the corporation. So there is an opportunity to start creating platforms. And then we have other opportunities coming from something which is very specific of Europe, which is regulation. So we have this geopatriation, what I would call geopatriation, this sovereign computing, that meaning that the data and the computing capacity should be in Europe for these regulatory reasons. So many different opportunities, many different expressions of these opportunities in the different markets, because every country and every jurisdiction have different structures and different maturity.
Great. That actually brings me to my next question because, Europe is very large. I'm sure you can't paint every region or country with the same brush. So I know, like you mentioned, there's a lot of differences there. So just wanted to zoom out a bit and see how do those market dynamics vary across countries, if you want to point to specific countries or just in a general sense.
Building data centers is one part of the business story. Of course, we need an asset in order to produce the kind of value that the clients are asking us. And the way we build these data centers in each market, depending on the access to energy, depending to the communications density, depending on the permitting to be able to develop these data centers, is not the same in across the different jurisdictions. So these different realities, and of course the business density, so where the clients sit and their propension to move their IT hardware and software to share facilities, which is, I mean, the principle of data centers. So what we see is that countries and cities like Frankfurt, which is the number one market in Europe, is the first one that is reaching the 1 gigawatt capacity. I mean, in Frankfurt, for instance, where we own a platform, we have 250 communications network to offer to our clients, which is a huge value added in order to integrate, I mean, the node in Frankfurt to the more global networks. In other countries, for instance, the Nordics, where we are also present, we have easy access to energy. The cost of energy in the Nordics is 1/10 the cost of energy in Germany. So as a consequence of that, we see different models of developing the data center world. And again, proximity, given the kind of applications that the clients are asking us, is also a value. And being close to the clients in order for these clients have easy access to their infrastructure, to their racks, to their applications, to their servers is also very relevant. The proximity to the business, the access to energy, and the access to communication networks is what has determined, I mean, the concentration of the data center industry in Europe in these five markets that I referred earlier. But now, tier two cities like Madrid, like Stockholm, like Milan, are really growing very, very fast in this business as well. Another thing perhaps that I could add is that we are starting to see some specialization in data centers. When we talk about data centers, sometimes we talk about generic computing capabilities, but every industry is different. What we see, for instance, in our fiber networks is that we have the opportunity to associate to these FTTH, fiber to the home networks, some small data centers that we're doing in Spain now, because when we have a dozens of local and regional operators that share the fiber, the next step is to share the transmission networks to the most important points. And today, each of these operators have or own their own transmission network. So we are putting them together, and we are hosting them together in a specialized telecoms data centers where they can enjoy the benefits of having not only one single access network, but also one single transmission network. And once they are in the data center, they can exchange traffic, they can peer with each other, they can start sharing electronics, active equipments like OLT, and we can do many more things. And this same principle that applies to telecoms might be applied to many other industries. So mature market segments, and this is what we are seeing now, some segmentation in the industry.
Yeah, thank you for touching on that. I was hoping to kind of go back to the flat markets that you mentioned earlier. It
Mhm.
does sound like you are seeing a shift from these markets to tier two cities in the fiber sector. What do you think is driving that the most?
I mean, it's driving the need to having computing capabilities closer and closer to the client, because different to communications or to connectivity, which has a human limit, there is a limited number of series that I can watch on TV in one day. But when we talk about computing, it's all about machines. And there is no human limit to the need of computing capacity that machines need. And this computing capacity has all other kind of requirements associated, like latency, which is the time that these computing workloads take moving from one point to another. And when we have things communicating to each other and exchanging traffic, for instance, autonomous vehicles, the difference between life and death is 1 millisecond or less in the exchange of those workloads. And these workloads cannot travel, I mean, thousands and thousands of kilometers. And this is why we have to increasingly being closer to things. And things are not only in cities, things are spread across the countries. depending on the applications. So computing is going to be everywhere. Today is in our telephones, right? So the amount of computing capacity that we have here is amazing. So this computing capacity is going to be spread all across the value chain. And this does not mean aligned with the fact of having this amount of capacity, computing capacity in Europe, as I said, three-quarters of that concentrated in five different places only.
Absolutely. If you had to point to some challenges facing Europe's digital landscape, what would those be? And sort of how are you and infrastructure managers and investors navigating those?
The way I see or we see our business is a way that I would summarize as a digital real space, meaning that in 1 square meter, we need to have access to infrastructure, energy, DACs to deploy our fiber. We need poles. We need, a lot of different things in order to make communication and computing happen. And it's increasingly more difficult to have access to these things. Energy is a very scarce resource, particularly in the flabby cities that I mentioned, and the amount of energy that we need changes in scale every few years, right? So we need to generate more. We need to generate on a increasingly renewable basis because this is what investors ask us for. And we need to make sure that we have the right grid capacity in order to get access to that energy. So this is, the first thing that comes to my mind. The second thing is the communication networks. We have a high density of communication networks in the center of Europe. But for instance, in Southern Europe, we don't have the same kind of long haul networks that we have concentrated in the markets that I referred. So there is a need and an opportunity to reinforce the long haul networks inherited from the old telco club with different capacities and technologies to the ones that this computing explosion requires. So we need to develop and invest money in that connectivity. You know, many submarine cables are under development, linking places like Iberia, 14 new submarine cables arriving in the coming years. And then we need to connect these submarine cables with this long-haul terrestrial connectivity and with all the data centers associated with those routes. The third thing that we need is to have a regulation and manage the regulation. The requirements coming from regulation are increasingly demanding. For instance, in Germany, we need to guarantee a certain efficiency, the so-called PUE, which is the amount of energy that we use in our telecom and computing equipment compared to the whole energy that we use to cool, to do all the, let's say, infrastructural services around the generation of IT value. And these regulations are very strict, 100% of energy renewable, heat recovery, and managing all that is a real challenge. The time that permitting takes sometimes and the constructive requests are also a big challenge. Sometimes it takes 1 year, more than 1 year, to get these permits and the connection of these facilities to the grid and to the communication networks. And then I think that one very important thing and very important challenge is to make sure that we have a clear customer centricity, which is the main reason for which we develop these data centers. I see a lot of people very much focus on the asset, but the asset is also a mean to really create customer value. And we have to have a very clear view about the different ways to do that because the market is very much segmented. It's very different serving retail clients, that wholesale clients, that hyperscale clients, and the kind of technology setting, the kind of processes, the kind of proximity that we need in order to manage all that is very different. So these intangibles, besides the tangibles that I mentioned, are increasingly more important and are increasingly the attributes that make the difference between success and lack of success in this industry.
Well, that's a fantastic note to leave off on. I think thank you so much for being here and just bringing your expertise to the topic. It's definitely something like I mentioned earlier, that our audience is following closely, that they're, invested in. So, thank you for kind of breaking it down for us.
Kali, a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye bye.